Hi, I'm Simon. Thanks for tuning into The Ordinary Filmmaker. If you're new here, click subscribe to receive notification of my latest videos so you don't miss any news, rumors, or tutorials. And all the links to everything I talk about in this video, including gear discussed, can be found down below with my affiliate links. So if you're looking to buy new camera gear and you want to help support this channel, please use the links below to B&H and Amazon.com and give Patrick a call at Downtown Camera in Toronto. As you can see, I'm not in my normal spot. The weather is not so great today. It's been raining a lot and I love the rain. We need it. It's greening things up, which is terrific, but it makes shooting very difficult. But I have a friend with me here today. On loan from Downtown Camera is the 15 to 35 millimeter RF lens, and that allows me to shoot up on my deck here because I've got a shorter space, and framed it doesn't look too bad at all. I'm quite happy with this, so I'm filming with the 15 to 35 in this video. But as we come up to September, and this is pretty close to September in Ontario, what generally happens is weather makes a dramatic turn. So right around the last week of August, or really September's generally the turning point, like right when we hit Labor Day weekend, the weather patterns change. The weather gets a lot more volatile. We get all sorts of kinds of weather. The temperatures cool off at night dramatically. And by the time we hit the end of September, no one feels like it's summer anymore. So if the weather's really bad, like if it's teeming down with rain, I'm not going to risk any of the equipment here. I'm going to film in my studio, which is not nearly as much fun and exciting. And of course it's tough for my family because these usually take about 90 minutes to set up and shoot. So they're stuck up in the rooms or they have to go outside. And if the weather's not that great, they don't want to be outside either. But back to the 15 to 35, I plan on using this lens a whole lot more. I only have it until Friday. So I'm going to try some vlogging later this weekend, hopefully, weather permitting. But I also have the 800 millimeter, which if you watched my video just the other day, you'll see some incredibly stunning shots that I took with it. F11, in my view, is not a handicap at all. And yes, the construction is not as good as the EF 100 to 500 or any of the L series super telephoto lenses, but it's affordable. This lens is $899. It's under $1,000. It's affordable for the ordinary filmmaker, and I think it's a terrific lens. Yes, you're not going to use it all the time. It's kind of like a drone. It's something you're not going to use all the time, but there's something magical about that kind of lens. To me, the 15 to 35, it's like wearing a suit. It's like meeting a team of lawyers. It's very professional. It gets the job done, but it's not exciting. The 800 millimeter, though, it allows you to see things you couldn't see before, like, for example, squirrels. And I know I talk a lot about these creatures, but when you lock onto them with an 800 millimeter lens, it's amazing the detail you can get into. And the video I shot the other day where I had a seagull, that was amazing. I basically got the seagull to fill up the entire frame, and then I was able to punch in a little bit further, and the detail was amazing. I was actually able to take a screenshot of one of those frames, and I put those up in that video as well. Nobody noticed or nobody said anything negative about, well, you can definitely tell those are screen grabs, because the detail was amazing. And I would say those screen grabs are more than good enough that you could use them on Facebook, Instagram, and even print off 4x6 prints. So in a pinch, you didn't take enough photos, well, screen grab them from the video. So I'm going to be testing these lenses out. I'm going to be reviewing them a whole lot more from the point of view of the ordinary filmmaker. Like, what does this do? Why is the 800 millimeter lens a magical lens? And the 15 to 35, very, very good lens, 2.8 f-stop or aperture. It's a really, really good lens. Everyone's talked about it, but I want to see what it's like in the hands of the ordinary filmmaker. What is it like with this lens and the R5 vlogging in the forest? How well does it perform? And some other tests like this one here. But I love the focal length. It's a terrific lens. But today is not about reviewing stuff. It's all about getting into your questions and answers. So I've got quite a few questions for today. Let's go ahead and take a look at our first question, which is from Randall. Randall asks, after the firmware update, has anything in the menu on the R5 been taken away or missing? Updates are usually fixes, but in the computer world, that is sometimes a fix or is removing a selection in the BIOS or from the motherboard. Randall, I haven't seen anything missing. I haven't seen anything added, not in this firmware update. And to be honest with you, I haven't gone over it with a fine-tooth comb where I've had the manual side by side and I've gone through every menu item. But in terms of shooting for the ordinary filmmaker, nothing's got in the way. and the opposite is in effect, essentially. So the cool down times have improved and all that kind of stuff. So no, I haven't seen anything removed, or I haven't seen anything added. Frosty asks, do you have any insight into why Canon hasn't responded to the overheating issue with all the information that's out in the wild? It seems like they could have been more proactive. Well, actually, and I guess this is depends on when you sent this comment. I think it was a few days ago, but Canon kind of has responded, and that response is the firmware 1.1.0. The press statement? No, they haven't responded officially with a press statement like they did right after the camera was announced, with a press statement talking about the overheat times. So the firmware 1.1.0 is the only response that they've given to date. They have improved the cool down times by addressing how the camera determines whether it's heating up or not. They haven't changed the threshold for what they consider to be overheating, but they have changed how they get to that value of measuring what the temperature is. Oh, guys, one thing before I go into the next question. I'm shooting this in 4K HQ, so I'm testing to see how far I can get in this shoot, and I've got my camera connect down here so I can see how long we've been shooting. Been shooting for about 10 minutes already, and it's 69 degrees Fahrenheit, which is right around 20 degrees Celsius. So once it does overheat, I'm then going to test that I can go back over to 4K 30 and finish the video in that mode. So we'll just have to go ahead and see. Or, depending on how much cooldown time I need, I might continue in 4K 30 at HQ, or in high quality mode. All right, so let's get to the next question. OJ Hansen asks, will Canon cave in and unlock the R5 to its maximum potential? I love that term, to the max. It's kind of like a sci-fi term. Weapons to maximum, shields to maximum. How about just turn the shields on? And if you're in a firefight, why wouldn't you have them on the max? Anyhow, enough of debunking science fiction technobabble. What was the question again? Oh, Canon. Oh, yeah. No, of course they're not going to unlock it to their maximum. That's the job of Magic Lantern. Canon is aiming this camera primarily at photographers, but they're also offering a significant nod to videographers. Despite what people are saying, this camera is light years ahead of what the 5D Mark IV was. In the 5D Mark IV, we had 4K, I think up to 30 frames per second, but it had a 1.7 times crop. We had 1080, but it was in 720. Well, look, we've got 120 frames per second in 4K now. Sure, it's only 7.5 minutes, but for most ordinary filmmakers, I think that will be enough. You would have to determine if that's enough for you. We have 4K 30 that's still has that 30-minute record limit, but you can keep recording and recording and recording. Yes, it's a little bit soft, but then again, so is the 5D Mark IV, and you don't have that crop anymore. We get full sensor, which is nice. Not as good as 4K HQ, but if you're doing a lot of videos like me, and most of them are around 10 to 15 minutes or less, 4K HQ has worked perfectly fine. And here I am trying it out today with my Q&A session, and I'm curious to see how well things go. Now, if I do have to back out and go into 4K 30 without high quality mode enabled, I'm not sure that's going to make a huge difference. From what I've seen in my analytics, all the new people usually will cut out somewhere after the beginning, or they'll pick and choose their stories and go out after that. It's only my regulars, my subscribers, my regular viewers that usually stick around to the end, and they're not going to worry if there's a slight difference in the detail. And with the background kind of blurred out here, well, most of it, I'm not really too sure that it's going to be that much of an issue. But I definitely don't think they're going to unlock it to its maximum. I really would follow Magic Lantern to see what they have planned for the R5. And of course, as I hear updates for the Magic Lantern team, I'll let you guys know too. But generally, it takes Magic Lantern a few years to do this. They have to, first of all, get a hold of a camera, and it can take a while. I think even the 70D at this point still doesn't have a fully stable release. It's still in beta, I think. So it does take time, but they're not going to cannibalize their other lines, or at least from their point of view, they don't want to risk doing that. I just don't see that. I see that the R5, as good as it is, and as great as it would be if they remove the overheat and the record limits, it doesn't compete with their cinema line. Now, yes, the C70, which is coming out, and I should have details for you guys later this weekend, that seems to be really encroaching into where the R5 is. It's kind of like, that's what Canon's saying. You don't like the overheats or the record limits? Oh, look at our C70. The C70 doesn't have CF Express cards, and I guess you'd have to then hook onto a Ninja. And even if I did purchase a Ninja, the ability to get the the information off the card really fast is where CF Express comes in. And there are times where I don't want to be having a whole lot of gear. I'm just out there with the camera. And I just like the speed of CF Express. It doesn't matter whether I shot 1,000 photos or I've shot about 40 minutes of video. 1,700 megabytes per second is a whole lot faster than 300. So if you're doing a lot of video, that speed matters. But really good question. Thank you. John asks, a firmware update is about to be released for the R5 to ameliorate the overheating. What about the R6? John, I've heard absolutely nothing. This was just like back in May and June, the lead up to the announcement of the R5. Everything was R5, R5, R5. Very little came out on the R6. And that's the same thing that's going on right now. We're hearing very little about the R6, nothing about firmware updates. But I would assume that whatever they've done to the R5 for the overheating sensor, they'll probably do the same thing for the R6. Now, they might have already have done that because they only just started shipping these things recently. Or maybe when it was released yesterday, so I haven't heard anything about a firmware. But let me know what you think. How is it performing in terms of overheating? I'm really curious to know because I wasn't able to get a camera this time from Canon. Apparently they're on a cross-country tour and they need all the gear they can. So when I do get one, I'll be able to find out and let you know. But if you've already got one, let me know what you're finding out with the camera. Another question from Frosty. Do you think the cripple hammer at Canon should undergo electroconvulsive therapy to cure its abusive behavior? Oh. Yeah. For those of us who don't like Canon, it's a great joke. For those of us who do have Canon gear, it's frustrating. And you sometimes feel like you're in a bit of an abusive relationship. And I know people are saying, well, Simon, why don't you get the A7S III? And I do plan to get it, but you've got to understand, I've got the 50 millimeter f1.2, and that's going to cost me a couple of grand to buy it for Sony. I just don't want to have to spend thousands of dollars for gear that I already have when the R5, despite its crippling in some areas, gives me the results that I need. Yes, there are some frustrations. Yes, I need to have a monitor always here to know if it's recording or not, because it could stop recording for overheating. It could stop recording because I hit 30 minutes. And yes, that's frustrating. But I look at the results and the quality, the step up over the 70D is really there. It's really terrific. Now, if Sony had released the A7S III back in 2018 when I really needed a new camera, or 2019, I would be filming on that camera right now. I would have taken the plunge. I would have had to spend a whole lot more just to get the basic lens that I have now, but I would have taken that plunge. But when Canon offered the R5, it gives me enough of what I need, gives me all the results that I'm looking for, all the capabilities that I need. So I'm satisfied. A little bit disgruntled, a little bit frustrated with the cripple hammer, definitely, as always. We thought Canon had changed. We thought they'd turned around and gone was the cripple hammer. Nope. The cripple hammer had just gone undercover. It was like 007. You didn't really know he was there. He was dressed up in a tuxedo. He looked nice, and he drove a DB11, Aston Martin DB11. So he looked all dressed up, joined society, but no, underneath all that, he still had his Walter PBK. He was still a lethal assassin. And the cripple hammer, I hope as we get more firmware updates, things will get refined a bit more. The overheat times will change. The cool down times will change, because I still think there's room for improvement. And again, the feedback that you guys give to Canon really helps effect a change. Bella asks, what's in your camera bag? That's almost a tough question, because I'll be honest with you. Depending on what I'm shooting, what goes into my camera bag changes each time. And that's the first bit of advice I'd give you is evaluate where you're going and put the right stuff in the camera gear. Do it the night before and then do a reevaluation in the morning, because sometimes when we wake up, we see things a little differently. The basics are always in there. I always have extra batteries. I always have extra storage cards, whether it's CF Express, SD, whatever it is. I always make sure I've got plenty of those in there. And I make sure the content that's on them isn't stuff I'd like to keep a little longer. I also have a little white balance card. I use the one from Gregg. I like it. I think it's really great because as you hold it up to your face and tilt it, you can create extra shadows by your hand, and then you're creating a grayscale over it too, so it's not just white. And I like that better than these ones that have the white, gray, and black, because I find that the gray is not, it's not the gray that I want, because you'll do that sometimes. You'll be balancing, and by clicking the different areas of the grayscale, you get a different result, and you go, yeah, no, this works better today. I want to do this, and I like that. In terms of lenses, usually I'll have something like the 50mm in there, because that's really great for portraits. The R5 produces really stunning portraits, so I've got that in there. My 24-105 is usually the lens that's always attached to the camera, because 90 times out of 100, if I'm doing run and gun work, that's the lens that's going to work for me. I also want to have some sort of weather protection, so if it does go to rain, I've got something I can quickly fold out and protect it. And the camera bag itself is only about this big here. It's not a very big one. I did a video a couple of months ago about what's going to be in my R5 camera bag, and you want to keep it small. These big, huge backpacks, you don't want those. You really don't. They're heavy, they make you sweat, and you'd be surprised at how much you can get into the small camera bag like this. Mine, I can put in 3 lenses, I can put all the gear I've mentioned, and they work really, really well. You might also want to consider one of those really, really tiny Gorilla tripods. They can be very helpful if you're out in the field and you decide you want to do, like you're on vacation and you want to do a vlog, or news has come out like me, and I want to do a video for YouTube, and it's nice to be able to have that stabilized, because a full-size tripod isn't all that great. Now I just want to drill down a little bit into the types of storage cards, CF Express versus SD cards versus Sony's version of the CF Express Card A. You've got to ask yourself what matters most to you. I was planning on buying a pro-grade UHS SD card with a max read and write speed of around 300 megabytes, and I've decided not to, because it's a lot of cost and I don't really get a huge bang for the buck. My SD card is primarily for photos, not for videos. And I do have photos written to both cards. The reason I have it to go to both cards is if I'm doing video work and I take some photos, they get put onto the CF Express card, so when I bring it to the computer, I can take all the photos and all the video project files off of the CF Express card, just like that. 1700 megabytes per second versus 300. That's over 5 times, or it's a fifth of the speed. So that's really huge if you've got a lot of video, or if this is your business and you're making money off it. Or for me, if I can save myself upwards of an hour getting this stuff off, that gives me more me time, more family time. So the cost of the CF Express matters, and that's another reason why you also might want to consider a Ninja. It's not about avoiding the crippling effects of what Canon's done to overheating and record modes. It's also the fact that you get ProRes 422 in the unit, and you can edit it right off the SSD, saving you a ton of time. And to me, time is the most valuable item. And at what, $700, $699. The Ninja offers a lot of value in terms of workflow savings. So that's a bit of an idea of what's in my camera bag. Sasha asks a very similar question. Any camera bag suggestions? I like the Low Pro. I've been using a Low Pro for about 10 years now. It's getting a little tattered, and I'm perfectly fine with that. And here's the thing too, if you can get a used one and it doesn't look all that great, perfect. What that tells people, would-be thieves, is that there's nothing exciting in here. I don't look after my gear. Don't pay much attention to me. Whereas if you have a nice brand new, really big looking things, people think there's a lot of money in there. I'm going to watch this person. When she's not looking, I'm going to take that bag and run. Not always, but perception matters, and perception is reality. I use a very small low-end Pro. I'd say it's about 12 inches by about 10 inches. I'll see if I can't, maybe actually I already have one in the description down below. I think I have a B&H or Amazon link for that. And it, to me, is the perfect size. It's a great travel bag. If you're on a plane, it fits into the overhead really nice. You want to be there early, so that way you can be in the front of the line, so you've always got a spot to put it in. You don't want to be jamming it in there. I usually put it towards the side, so it's better protected. And if you need to get up in flight and grab something out, it's right there. So that's really, really handy. The size of it, the lightweight. And I can easily, by myself, walking around town, walking around wherever I am, I can have that camera bag around my shoulder and the R5, and it really doesn't get in the way. And I find that the weight of it is so much better. So That's my recommendation. Whether you get a low pro, what do I say, low pro or something else, it's more the size that matters the most. But the low pro, they do last. Like mine is getting tattered, really tattered around the handle, but it still does the job inside. It's nice and clean. It also has a little bit of a, I guess, a weather condom that comes out, and it'll go right over the camera. So if you're out there shooting and all of a sudden the weather turns south, you can quickly cover everything up, and it does a really good job of protecting you. So that's my recommendation. Thanks for the question, Sasha. If you attach an EFS lens on your crop sensor Canon camera, do you still need to multiply by 1.6 to get a full frame millimeter? Yes, you do. So I shot just last week with my 18 to 135 STM lens, and I did it just because I could. I was curious to see the results. And you know what's really funny? I really felt like I had my 70D in my hands again, because that lens has been with me for years, warts and all, and I love that lens. It's really great, and the results were pretty much the same. Now, let me just say this. So yes, the crop factor, it simulated all that, but what I got was a little bit different. The results were better because I've got a better sensor, better autofocus. So it did produce better results, and that's what nobody's really talking about, is when you bring these EF lenses over to the R6, the R5, the EOS R, especially with the R6 and the R5 with the latest technology, you are getting better results just because of the underlying capabilities of the body. The lens itself isn't going to perform any better, but it's those, the better autofocus, the better color accuracy, the better dynamic range, right? Being able to C-log, which we could never do on the EFS bodies, which is really nice, and I'm looking forward to see what C-log 3 is. C-log, regular C-log wasn't enough for me to want to produce a lot of videos in it. It wasn't worth all the effort, but C-log 3 might be, especially as we get into winter. So good question. Oh, let's take a look at the timer here. So I'm right at around 30 minutes. I've been shooting in 4K HQ. At some point here, I'd expect it to stop, overheat, and I'll have to, well, I don't know, shoot in 4K 30 or let it cool down and try again. We'll just have to wait and see. What time is it? It's 8 o'clock. I don't know. Let's see. Let's roll the dice and see how far we can go. Nick asks, what do you think the odds are that Canon will address the R5 overheating on some level with firmware? Additionally, will they add 1080 at 120 at some point? Well, I've already addressed it in firmware 1.1.0, and one of the reasons why I'm shooting in 4K 30 high quality mode enabled is to be able to see how much an improvement we've got. I've already shot for 30 minutes and we're still going past 30 minutes. So obviously there's an improvement there. In my run and gun work, it does cool down quicker. I've yet to have a problem, but others have, and it really depends on your workflow. You've got to look at the results that you're trying to get. Will 4K 30 work for you? Will it not? It depends, but some testing that Gordon Lang and others have done, you definitely get a lot more, many more clips, sometimes as many as 3 times the amount of clips if you're doing short clips. But I'm taking it through my own paces. I'm basically moved to 4K HQ for all my in-studio videos, and I've yet to have a problem with overheating. So, well, let's be fair, my basement's frigid most of the time, so I shouldn't have a problem. But before firmware 1.1 came out, I got very close with 1.0. And the other part of your question was about 120 frames per second in 1080. Well, Canon has come out and stated that they are going to bring it to the R5 in a firmware update, so it is coming. They just didn't say. They listed off a whole bunch of capabilities they were going to bring out. C-Log 3 was one of them. 120 frames per second in 1080 was another, but they said in future firmware updates. So we could get one of these with each firmware coming up. It's really hard to say. None of the rumors are really indicating when we're going to get them and in what order, but Canon has come out and said, yes, we're getting C-Log 3, we're getting 120 frames per second in 1080. Brian asks, Canon's new R5 states that it improves IBIS for certain RF lenses in video recording. Could this potentially address the wobbling issue that the R5 has with wider lenses? Well, definitely, but keep in mind too, Brian, you also want to make sure you apply the firmware updates, which guess what I forgot to do this morning? I forgot to apply the firmware update to the 15 to 35, which I'm going to have to do after this video before I do my vlogging. So if you notice any wobbling, just keep in mind I haven't applied the firmware update there. And in terms of future firmware updates from Canon for the body itself, Yeah, I would look at this as an iterative process. There's lots of bugs with the R5. They're going to work on improving those bugs, adding features. I really admire Canon for taking the same approach that Panasonic has done. I think Panasonic is the king when it comes to firmware updates. They take a base camera and they just improve the living daylights out of it. Each new release is something you want to put on your camera because they've given you some other gem, some other capability that the camera didn't have before, and I'm glad to see Canon doing the same thing. They took the EOS R and they turned it into a very good solid camera. I was very disappointed with that camera when it came out, but today, no, I think it's a good, decent camera. And I think by the time we hit Christmas, we're going to see a huge difference in the R5, and hopefully they continue to tweak things like the wobble and the overheat and record times, and hopefully they do remove the record limits. But despite what Media said back in July the 10th at Pro AV, the announcement from Canon of what they're going to include in future firmware updates, there's absolutely nothing mentioned about that. So let's keep the pressure on Canon and see what happens. Lolita asks, what are the rumors on the M7? What do you think the specs might be? Cost, release date, etc. I don't want to speculate too much on the M7 right now because there's been very little dropping, and really what I like to do when it comes to the rumors is I like to report what the rumor sites come up with and then give my analysis on how well I think they are. What I will say this is it's M7, it's not the M5, it's not the M6, and usually with hybrid cameras, usually the smaller the number, like for example an M1 would be the best M1 you could buy. With video cameras, it's the other way around, it's flipped on its head. So I would expect the M7 not to be as capable as a newly released M6 Mark II or an M5, and I think the M5 is going to be a really good camera. I think the M50 is going to be pretty good too. As far as date, the only camera that I think we're getting this year is going to be the the rumors have bounced around. So it's either going to be an M50 or it's going to be an M5, and it's supposed to drop late in December in Japan only and Q1 for the rest of the world. The rumors for the EFM mount have been all over the place. It's another reason I really don't want to get down there and get into the details. We're definitely going to see 4K up to 30 frames per second. Is there going to be a crop? What kind of autofocus system are they going to give us in that mode? Are they going to give us 120 frames per second in 4K? Unlikely, but they might. I don't want to speculate too far because, like I said, I'm not getting a whole lot of information. But this year for the M7, if we are going to get it this year, I would look for September, October, which is less than a week away. But I'll let you know as more information comes out, Lolita. But right now, nothing that I would want to bet on at this point. Popcorn asks, did the Canon EF 50mm f1.8 winner ever contact you? No, Popcorn, he didn't. So come September the 1st, if Jeff hasn't reached out to me, it frees up and I can offer it off to somebody else. I hope that wasn't thunder. The skies are really darkening right now. I don't think I have much more time before the skies open up, so hopefully I can finish outside, but it's getting really dark here right now. But something else, have you noticed? I'm now shooting in 4K 30. HQ mode is disabled. The camera didn't completely overheat, but I got the overheat warning. But this is the interesting part. It stopped recording. And when I went back to the camera to see why, it was recording to the SD card. I took the CF Express card out, went down to the basement, checked the video and everything, put it back in. But this is so frustrating what the R5 does. Even though I've told it to write the video to the CF Express card, when you take the CF Express card out and put it back in, even if the camera's turned off, it defaults to the SD card or slot too, and it's really frustrating. So now everything, a good 36 minutes has been written to the SD card, but on the flip side, I got 36 minutes of recording in 4K HQ before the camera died. Now the warning came up, so who knows how much longer I would have gotten. And since I have about 6 questions left, I thought I'd just flip it over to 4K 30 and finish it up since the weather's taking a turn for the worse. But yeah, it's a little bit frustrating. So I didn't complete the test as I'd wish, but I got 36 minutes as opposed to, what, 25 or 30? And it does flash 25 minutes, but that doesn't mean you're only going to get 25 minutes. It can go beyond it. So with the overheat warning on, I got up to 36 minutes, which is good news. So that means if I even think of doing a half an hour videos for the studio, that's quite doable. Now again, the temperature when I started was 69, and it's still 69 degrees and a little bit humid. So that's interesting. Oh, I really wish if I had been recording to the CF Express card, I would have gone, and then see how long I could have gotten. But I'm thinking before it completely shut down, I might have gotten about 40 minutes out of it. Anyhow, so let's go on to the next question. Stop the FOMO asks, are you planning on getting any new Canon RF cinema cameras in 2021? Are they priced low enough for us ordinary filmmakers? No, I really don't think they do. I think the C70 is going to be close enough to the R5 price, but I have already stated this. I think that the R5 is already at the very, very, very top end of what the ordinary filmmaker can afford, and it's not for all demographic age groups. I think if you're my age, if you're looking at retirement, your house is paid off, then it's a whole lot easier to say to your wife, hey honey, I'd like to get a Canon R5. It's going to be about $6,000 fully kitted out. And she goes, but that's a whole lot better than saying, I'm thinking of getting a Corvette or a Mustang, a sports car, which costs, in excess of $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. So to say, hey, I'm looking at getting a camera, it's $4,000. Another lens is about $1,500. I think that's a whole lot easier to justify, and yes, I see that. A lot of people who are buying these are retired or close to retirement. They don't have a lot of pressures of having a young family with the financials, and they're there. I've been through that. I know what it's like. You do not have any extra money lying around. So to go into the cinema, that $6,200, that's base. Forget even the taxes and anything on top of that. Then you need to add things to it. Cards, for example, are expensive. You need to add a viewer, you need to add XLR inputs, you need to add microphones, you need to add all sorts of gear. And by the time you've got it fully kitted out, you're well north of $8,000. So I would say that if you're an intermediate YouTube channel, it might be something to consider. But I'm not even at the revenue where I could even justify a C70 myself, or even a used C100. The R5 is pretty well the limit of what I can justify for my channel right now. But I'm thankful to you, and I'm thankful for the channel because you've allowed me to be able to afford this so I can produce much better results for my run and gun work. And based on everything I've seen here, if I didn't have this channel, after seeing what the R6 does, I'd probably be very tempted to just get a EOS R and work around 120 frames per second where it doesn't work in some of the other issues. Would still be a huge improvement over my 70D. But for the ordinary filmmaker, no. I mean, if somebody offered me one where I could borrow one and bring it in and show it off, and then yes, I think from a pure marvel of technology, I love watching the TV show, the Top Gear and the Grand Tour. I tried to merge those together, same cast and crew, but yeah, I love watching that show because I love seeing the bleeding edge of technology in cars. I could never afford a $5 million Bugatti Veyron, but if I had unlimited funds, that would almost be my perfect sports car because you can drive around in comfort and all that stuff, but if you want to kick it around the track and have fun with it, you can, although I wouldn't consider it a track car. I would get something like a Corvette. But I'm getting off topic a little bit here. The whole point is that the cinema cameras I do not feel are aimed at the ordinary filmmaker in the least, and they're just video. I think something like the R5 is so much better, or the R6. No, the R5, because of those overheat modes, are far more of a crippling blow. Why on earth Canon, for the life of me, I can't figure out why 4K 30, 4K 24, 25 is crippled with an overheat warning. That is just, I think the perfect word there is asinine. In 2020, that is a basic standard video mode. When are we going to see the Mark II of the R6? What, at least 2 years from now? So I think that is just redonkulous. Sure, maybe you can get 40 minutes, but you shoot 30 minutes, you have to stop the record button, then you got another, 10 minutes? It's frustrating. But yeah, went off on the weeds a little bit with that one, but weather's looking a little bit better, so maybe I would have been okay shooting in 4K HQ. But let's keep going. Robert asks, can you give us an assessment of the R5 with firmware 1.1? Yeah, certainly, Robert. I keep thinking it was Friday. On Thursday, I went down to Toronto to pick up a couple of lenses from Patrick at Downtown Camera. I immediately slapped on the 15 to 35 and started shooting, but I didn't get a whole lot. Surprisingly, the star of the day wasn't the 15 to 35, it was actually the 800 millimeter. And when I got down to Harbourfront, at least there was a nice breeze. Actually, it was more like gale force winds, but it helped cool things down. I felt a little bit better. I tried to vlog. I did this for about 5 or 10 minutes. It didn't work. I think at this point I was down to about 15 minutes of record time. So I found a nice place where it wasn't very windy. I switched out the lenses. I put on the 800 millimeter, and I shot with that for about 2 hours. But I didn't shoot continuously for 2 hours because with wildlife, you're hunting them, right? You're trying to find them. You're trying to locate them, and seagulls are pretty easy to find, but you want to find them where they're propped up properly. They're in the right place. You don't have a lot of people around. You're trying to distance yourself as well. And I got some great shots of seagulls. Again, I shot some more time, and the overheat came back down to 15 or 10 minutes. I never got the overheating to get down to a point where it said it was going to take less or give me less than 10 or 15 minutes of record time. And this was a very hot and humid day. It was in the mid to low 80s, which is high 20s Celsius. And look, I was overheating. I was frustrated. I didn't want to shoot for much longer. So the weather overheats, and my internal sensors were saying this was terrible. But the camera kept going. I kept shooting up till about, 2, 3 in the afternoon. I switched over the lens back to the 24 to 105, and I shot my son playing around. So it was pretty good for me. One of my viewers said, you got to be careful, Simon, because some of us will think, okay, it's perfect for run and gun. We'll shoot 20, 30 clips over a good couple of hours, and the overheat will get in the way. And you've got to assess the kind of work you're doing. Sorry, a little itch here. Oh, I hate that when that happens. You've got to assess your work. If you're doing a full day of shooting and you're going to be producing maybe upwards of 200 clips, and you're going to be aggressively going out there, you might only have a minute or two between clips. The R5, I would not do that. I would make sure I had multiple R5s. So and that's maybe the thing to do, is if you have 2 of them, if you're doing this for professional stuff, then you have 2 of them. But 1, no, is definitely not going to be enough. But assess the capabilities you need out of the camera. For me, doing run and gun work, family work, it's perfectly fine. The amount of time I have between scenes changes. I'm waiting for my son to do something different, or waiting for the set to change. So we're doing the CN Tower, for example. I'll shoot a bunch of stuff up there. And then for us to go back down the elevator and go to maybe Ripley's Aquarium, 10, 15 minutes could have gone by, and it allows it to cool down more than enough. And when you're shooting inside, temperatures are usually right around that, 70 degrees, 68 degrees, or 20 to 23 Celsius. So yeah, it's definitely improved. The cool down times, I would say, is what's definitely improved. And as you saw from shooting this video, I got 36 minutes of 4K with HQ enabled, or high quality mode enabled, and it didn't fully shut off. I actually ran out of space on my SD card, and of course the battery was ready to fail too. So I would have had multiple errors, the perfect storm, and it wasn't the camera overheating that tossed things away. But I still think there's room for improvement. They should ditch those record limits. Those are stupid. And I think there is room to improve upon the temperatures as well. I think they can let the temperature rise a little bit more, and that can give us quite a bit more record time. Popcorn asks, does cropping photo 1.6 in post and using the body crop mode at 24 megapixels render the same image? If yes, then what is the use of using the in-body crop mode if cropping gives the same results? Now, this is a very good question. I'm waiting for a nice clear night, and it looks like the skies are clearing, which is awesome. I didn't expect this, because I want to put the 800 millimeter on and shoot the moon. And the question is, do I shoot full frame, or do I shoot cropped mode? And there's a couple of things I'm going to do. I'm going to shoot in 8K, which is full frame, and then I'm going to crop in post. And if my videos are going to be 4K, so it gives me the equivalent of 2 times optical zoom. So if I've got the 800 millimeter times 2 is 1600 millimeters, right? So that's pretty good. Or I could shoot in 4K cropped, which is 800 millimeters times 6 8s are 48. That's 1280. Or I could shoot in 4K, and then I can crop it down later. So I'm going to definitely try 8K because that gives me the best bang for the buck. But the one advantage of using the cropped mode is you do get 5.1 megapixel or 5.1K oversampled, which is nice. So the detail's better. We've tested this. It's better than just shooting in regular 4K 30 or 4K. Well, 4K HQ would be better. But what is happening here is you're framing everything. The camera's doing all the work, so you don't have to go through all that effort of cropping and post. It might not be a huge amount of effort, but you're just saving yourself time. So I guess the real benefit here is if you were comparing 4K HQ to the 4K cropped mode, 4K HQ provides you with better detail, but that crop, that saves you from cropping in later. So that would be the real advantage, because if you crop into 4K HQ, as you get down to, let's say you cropped in by a factor of 2, well then you don't have that 8K anymore, you're down to 4K. So at that point, the 5.1K oversample crop mode would actually be better. So it's kind of like getting dressed in the morning. There's so many different combinations of things you can try on, and that's what I want to do when I shoot. I'm probably going to be out here for a couple of hours. Thankfully, the sun sets at 8 o'clock. Yeah, the sun sets. I was going to say the moon sets. The sun sets at 8 o'clock, so I'm going to try different combinations. I'm going to try 8K first, then I'm going to try 4K HQ and crop in, and then I'm going to try the cropped mode and see how that works. But I think definitely shooting with the 8K is going to give me the biggest bang for the buck, because once you crop down, you've essentially got you can go up to about 1600 millimeters, which is really exciting. I'm really looking forward to doing this. The last time I shot a super telephoto was the EF 100-400, and I actually went back to look at a lot of my moon shots, and most of them were shot with an f-stop of f8 or between f8 and 11. So the 800 millimeter isn't going to be a problem. I'm really looking forward to seeing that. So hopefully tonight, the weather gods look at this. Wow, the clouds are rapidly moving out. I've got some blue skies showing up. So this is really exciting. I hope my white balance is set properly. I really do. It's one thing I didn't check this morning because I was in custom mode. And anyhow, so we'll see. Great question, Popcorn. Thank you. Carl asks, what's your favorite crop sensor camera and why? I'm going to say that the 70D for the longest time was my favorite camera because it was my first video camera, and that dual pixel autofocus really changed things for me. It made me realize that, wow, it's so easy to shoot video, when before dual pixel it was a lot more difficult. It's really one of those technologies that really makes life for the ordinary filmmaker really easy. And now that Sony's got a great autofocus system, Olympus has a good autofocus system. Who am I thinking? I can't remember. Panasonic, we're just not going to go there. But today, what would be my favorite if I was to buy another APS-C? There's so many choices. I like the 90D just because it works off of the glass I've got now. But I was watching Peter Gregg live last night, and it kept hunting with focus. Now, Peter does have glasses, and I don't, but it really surprised me how it was constantly hunting for focus. So if you go and look at Peter Gregg live last night, it should be out now, you'd be fine for about 10-15 minutes. All of a sudden, it would just pulse or lose focus and bring it back again, and I wasn't too happy with that. The Rebel T8i looks like another really, really good camera. Again, the autofocus system usually works very, very well in run and gun. And my 70D, the 90D and the Rebel have a better autofocus than the 70D, so I don't know if it was the settings he had, but I was quite surprised at how many times it was hunting. I still think the GH5 is an awesome camera. I really do. The only problem is the autofocus system, but if you're doing any studio work, then I think the GH5 is an awesome camera for you there. I think they produce really, really good results. And then Sony's got some really good cameras too, but for me personally, it probably would be the 70D, just because I have a whole bunch of EF glass. Yeah, and it's strange, since I went back to my 70D and I did a little bit of video, because sometimes I need to film off the back of the R5, and the 70D is more than enough, but now it feels very old. It feels very outdated because I've gotten so used to the quality coming out of the R5. The APS-C sensor just it seems different. It's like when you buy a new bed. I just feel very comfortable in my own bed, my new bed, and that's what the R5 is to me right now. So I'm very biased on this. I don't think I can give you a fair question or fair answer. And of course the other one too, the XT4. I wouldn't go with the XT3. The record limits are a little bit silly. some of the other things, but the XT4 is basically an XT3 fully polished off. And you know what, I'd be tempted to say for autofocus system, if you didn't have anything, I would go with the XT4 over even the 90D. I know sacrilege, right? But the XT4, it's a brilliant camera. Dijon asks, I know that this doesn't have anything to do with the R5, but do you by any chance know if they're ever going to update the firmware on the 5D Mark IV? And I honestly don't. The last time they released a firmware for the 5D Mark IV was a year ago. I think it was the 22nd of September. How did I remember that when I can't even remember to set the right recording card? I don't know. But yeah, they recorded it. They recorded it. They dropped a firmware update last year. I wouldn't have high hopes that they're going to release anything soon. Canon has such an aggressive year. They're releasing so many new cameras, so many new lenses. They've got the RF lenses, EF lenses. They got the EF bodies. So I should say, when I say EF, I mean the EFM. They're not releasing any new EF glass at all, but EFM glass. They're releasing new glass, they're releasing new bodies, they're releasing new RF lenses, they're releasing adapters, they're releasing accessories, the R6, the R5, and of course there's all the development work that's going on. Canon is in quite the development phase right now, so there's a lot going. With a 4-year-old camera, Dijon, I'm not too hopeful. Hi Simon. You mentioned that there's a crop mode on the R5 and R6. Does this work with RF lenses? Coming from the 70D, do you see yourself using this mode? Well, Tony, I was just talking about shooting the moon earlier, or in any other situation where you want to get that extra zoom, you want to turn, let's say, 100mm into 160mm, that's where those cropped mode comes in. And yes, I am going to try them out when I shoot the moon a little bit later. So for example, my 800mm lens in cropped mode takes that 800mm and gives me 1280mm. But in the R5, I can shoot in 8K, and then it takes that 800mm and turns it into 1600mm without changing my f-stop. And if I put a 2x on top of that, wow, that really, really pushes things out there. So yeah, I do plan on using them, but it's for specialized situations. You're going to know when you want to use this mode. You'll be shooting, you're thinking like, oh, I really wish, oh, wait a minute, I'll use the crop mode and get that. Now, you can film in 4K and crop in and simulate that. But with most editing software, it's not always easy. It's tweaking and fiddling around, whereas if you do it in the camera, there's no editing in post. It just saves you a bit of time. It's just, it's a nice feature. I didn't see the point to it when I first heard about it, but once you start shooting, you can see the benefits of them. You're not going to need them most of the time, but when you do need them, they're there. It's kind of like having a drone. You might use it once, twice, or 5 times a year, but once you have that need, you're glad you've got it. And our last question is from Sean. Do you use the custom modes on your R5? Oh yeah, definitely. But the funny thing, Sean, is I actually didn't set up my custom modes until I saw this question from you, and I realized, oh yeah, I really should do that. I literally spent a good hour or two one evening because this was the first time I shot out here. I had my studio settings set up, and I didn't write them down because I was always shooting studio. So when I went outside and I tried shooting with manual, I got things set up. I went back inside to shoot in my studio, and I completely forgot what my settings were. And it took me probably a good 2 or 3 videos before I had everything back to the way they were. It was very frustrating. So I immediately, once I put my 51.2 back on there, I registered my settings for C1. So C1 is my studio setup. So unless I change anything, that's what I'm going to use. And it really helps because now I can open up manual. I can play around with it. So if I'm shooting outside, I can come up with different positions, play around with it. And if you're not using your custom settings, guys, consider it. It can really be a time saver, especially if you've got a bad memory. Even your run and gun, if you're doing auto a lot, if you have a default profile like a picture style or some other settings that you, or maybe you play around, have your custom settings. Get all that set up, save it as a custom mode, and then you don't have to worry about changing the stuff, because even in auto mode, there are settings you can change and play around with. So I highly recommend it. It can save you a lot of time. I wish I had done it on my 70D. I wish I had been smart at the beginning, but thank you, Sean, for this question because you reminded me to record. But I only have C1 locked yet. I haven't fiddle around with I haven't had the R5 long enough to know how I want to have the settings nailed down, so I'm still playing around. C2 and C3 are still in flux, but I'll let you know as I lock down my settings there. But my settings for C1, my studio work, again, I have a backdrop that's completely black. I have one LED light onto that gives me a little bit of a sort of light gray halo around me to separate me from the background. I have two side lights on me. I have a ring light, which I've got here right now on me as well. So my ISO set to 320, my f-stop is 2.5, and my shutter, no surprises, is 1/60th. So really good question, but this is the last question for today. Guys, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you submitting these questions. When I first started doing this, I was doing this on a bi-weekly basis. I was looking at doing it monthly, but there's so much demand for answers. I'm more than happy to do this on a weekly basis. Now, if the number of questions drop off, then I'll consider changing the frequency. But as it stands, Sunday morning at 7 o'clock is when this video is going to break. And if you submit a question, it isn't 100% guaranteed that I'm going to be able to have your question here, because usually I get more than enough, but I'll do my best. And sometimes what I do is if you post a question, I'll carry it over into the next week. But usually what I do is usually Wednesday and into Thursday, I'll take your questions and I'll start building out the PowerPoint presentation, because that's what I use to record this. But don't feel if it's Thursday late at night or Friday early evening or even late evening that if you post a question it won't be included. If you've got a really good question, then it'll get prioritized over some of the other ones. And I've done that. I've had as many as 40 questions put up, and then what I do is I just line them up in the order that I want to go through them. And then when I get to about 20, 21, 22, based on the time I've recorded, so once I get to about an hour, which I'm about an hour and 15 minutes now of record time, that's usually when I stop. And that usually boils down to somewhere between 36 minutes and 50 minutes in post. But again, thank you so much for your questions. You guys are what make this channel possible. Your engagement, your feedback. My lighting has improved so much. So many other things have improved because of the suggestions you guys have given me. So I really do appreciate it. I do appreciate the community you guys are helping build with me. And lots of exciting things planned. So the rest of this weekend, I'm going to be shooting with the 800mm. Oh, the weather's looking beautiful. It's looking to be mostly sunny now. So I think the rest of the day is going to be good, and it's not going to be humid. A high of 75 degrees, which is probably 24.68 Celsius. Sorry for that abrupt cut, but once again, Canon's cripple hammer has affected my video. And this is what generally happens. I'll be recording. I lose track that I've been recording for 30 minutes and it stops. The R5 is silent, so I don't hear it stopping, and it gets in the way. And this is where I'm puzzled at Canon, because the record timers really don't, eliminating the record timers isn't going to stop somebody from going, oh, I was looking at the C100 or the C300. Canon's removed the record limits on the R5. Yeah, I'm going to go get that now. No, it doesn't happen. It's not cannibalizing their other cameras, but what it's doing here is it's ruining my customer experience. It's getting in the way of me producing content. And whenever that happens, I always think of like, I'm frustrated. And here I am venting with you guys, letting you know how, once again, the cripple hammer has gotten in the way of me producing content when there's really no good reason for it. And I don't buy those arguments that it will cripple other cameras. The quality you get in 4K 30 or even 4K HQ that you would with a C300, for example, I mean, it's light and day. The dynamic range, 15, 16 stops, the durability of it, the ability to shoot all day, continuously, and to set it up for broadcast is so much better in these cinema cameras. So yeah, that record time got in the way, so sorry about that rant. I know you guys probably encounter it yourself. It's frustrating, isn't it? So, but we are at the end of another video. I'm not sure where it cut off, but the rest of the weekend what I'm planning on doing is going to be shooting with the 800mm, depending on what wildlife starts to come out here. They usually are out in the morning. And it's also in the forest with the 15 to 35. So I'm really hoping to have a lot of fun, but I've got to quickly get all this content into my computer because it's filled up all my cards. Both cards are pretty much full today. So I've got to get that off there so I can start shooting other stuff. So I've got to quickly get this video edited before I can get out there. I need more cards. You need a 1 terabyte. I know 1 terabyte CF Express cards are expensive, but this is where a Ninja's looking better and better. You need the space. You really, really do. So if you're thinking of doing a lot of video recording and you don't have a Ninja, think about it. It's not all about the overheat. SSDs are so much cheaper. You can get a 1 terabyte. You can get a 2 terabyte SSD for $300. Put that on a Ninja, right? So $300 plus the Ninja, you're at just under $1,000. Or you can get a 1 terabyte CF Express card for $1,000, right? So, or it's close to $1,000, and that's my point is if you can use a Ninja, you really want to take a look at your storage. It makes a completely different argument of that. It's not just about mitigating with the overheating issues. But thanks again for watching The Ordinary Filmmaker. Don't forget to subscribe for your chance to win the Canon EOS R5. We'll see you again soon.